Number 9. Christopher Dorner. Naval reservist Christopher Dorner's career as an officer for the Los Angeles Police Department got off on the wrong foot almost immediately after he joined the agency in 2006. He had ongoing issues with his training officer, Teresa Evans, whom he accused of using excessive force on a suspect, shortly after she wrote in an evaluation that he needed to improve his performance. Dorner's report against Evans was ultimately deemed to be false, and he lost his job in 2008. He appealed his termination, but the decision was upheld. In early 2013, he posted an 11,000-word manifesto on Facebook declaring unconventional and asymmetric warfare on the LAPD and their families unless the department admitted that it fired Dorner in retaliation for his report against Evans. He listed 40 of the agency's employees and various others whom he felt were responsible for his dismissal. Dorner's disturbing post appeared shortly after he embarked on a days-long killing spree, starting with Monica Kwan, the daughter of a former LAPD captain and lawyer who represented him in his appeal. He also killed the woman's fiancé, Keith Lawrence. He shot at several police officers over the following days, killing one and leaving others injured. During a final standoff at a remote cabin in Big Bear Lake, Dorner opened fire on sheriff's deputies. 2 were airlifted to a hospital, where one of them died. After failing to persuade the disgruntled ex-cop to surrender, authorities discharged pyrotechnic tear gas canisters, which caused the cabin to catch fire. The blaze was too dangerous for firefighters to enter, and Dorner never emerged from the dwelling. An autopsy of his charred remains ruled that he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Number 8. James Brennand. One evening in 2022, a young man named Eric Cantu was eating a burger in his car outside a San Antonio McDonald's when he was approached by a police officer. In a confrontation that was captured on body cam footage, the cop, 25-year-old James Brennand, opened Cantu's car door and ordered him to exit the vehicle without any further explanation. In the video, Cantu appears to try backing out of the parking space, causing the car's open door to hit Brennand. The officer pulled out his gun and fired at Cantu as he tried to drive away. Cantu spent weeks in hospital with injuries to his stomach, diaphragm, lungs, liver, and arms. He's back home, but his family told local station KSAT that he faces a long road to recovery. A female passenger who was with Cantu during the incident was unharmed. It was later revealed that Brennand was dispatched to the McDonald's in response to a reported disturbance, but that Cantu had no involvement in the incident. The body cam video shows Brennand mentioning to dispatchers that he believed the young man's vehicle was involved in a separate incident that happened a few days earlier. Brennand lost his job and was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of aggravated assault by a public servant. The case is ongoing, and he's out on bond while awaiting the next step in the court process. Number 7. Norbert Poehlke. While working as a high-ranking police sergeant in Baden-Württemberg in Germany during the early 1980s, Norbert Poehlke won a considerable amount of money in the lottery. He put it toward the construction of a house for his family, but it wasn't long before his luck took a turn for the worse. Just a few years later, Poehlke lost his daughter to cancer, and he was riddled with debt. Desperate to stave off financial ruin, he began robbing people and banks. His typical MO was to lure a victim into his vehicle in a remote area, shoot the person in the head, steal the victim's vehicle, and drive to a nearby bank where he smashed the teller's windows with a sledgehammer. After collecting the money, Poehlke fled in the stolen vehicle. He did this at least 3 times, earning him the nickname of the Hammer Killer, even though the sledgehammer wasn't used as a murder weapon. Authorities finally identified Poehlke as their prime suspect more than a year later, after his police-issued gun was found at the scene of a botched robbery. His uniform was also found inside a locker at a railway station, where Poehlke claimed he changed quickly before a relative's funeral. But investigators found no records of any deaths in his family around that time. When they went to Poehlke's house to question him, nobody answered the door, so they went inside and found his wife and son, both dead from gunshot wounds. Poehlke and his other son were found dead a few days later in Italy in what appeared to be a murder-suicide. After determining that he was responsible for the robberies, authorities closed the case. Number 6. Shelby Coniglio. In the middle of the night in early 2022, police pulled a vehicle over in St. Petersburg, Florida, only to discover that the driver was a Pinellas County Sheriff's deputy named Shelby Coniglio. Officers would later describe how the 26-year-old displayed telltale signs of drunkenness. Her eyes were reportedly bloodshot, her speech was slurred, she was unsteady on her feet, and the officers noticed an overwhelming odor of alcohol. Coniglio performed poorly on field sobriety tests, and her blood alcohol level tested at 0.2, more than twice the legal limit for driving in Florida. She was charged with DUI with a BAC above 0.15 and was immediately fired in accordance with the sheriff's policy. Records revealed that she worked as a deputy in the Patrol Operations Bureau for 4 years before losing her job. Number 5. David Stephen Middleton. While working as an officer for the Miami-Dade Police Department in 1990, David Stephen Middleton was accused of brutally assaulting a young woman. He lost his job and was convicted on a lesser charge of false imprisonment. After serving 2 years of a 5-year sentence, he was paroled and moved to Colorado. Middleton eventually ended up in Nevada, where he worked as a cable TV repairman. In 1995, the murdered remains of a 45-year-old schoolteacher named Catherine Powell were found in a dumpster in Reno. It wasn't long before authorities began to focus on Middleton, who had made a service call to Powell's home just days earlier and used her credit card to buy stereo equipment. They also found him in possession of an uncommon type of yellow trash bag that Powell's body was found in and which wasn't sold in many stores. During the investigation, the skeletal remains of another woman, Thelma DeVere, were discovered in a meadow in Verde, Nevada. DeVere had vanished 8 months earlier. Around the time she went missing, Middleton was seen coming and going from her apartment. Shortly before DeVere's disappearance, Middleton and his girlfriend had eaten at a restaurant where she worked. Middleton was also seen at a nightclub DeVere was known to frequent. He was convicted on 2 counts of capital murder and was sentenced to death. Over the following years, Florida authorities brought charges against Middleton for several crimes against women that occurred during his time as a police officer. He's also suspected of being responsible for the disappearance of a young woman in Colorado in 1993, but was never charged in the case. Middleton has been on death row for over 25 years now. Nevada's last execution was carried out in 2006, making it unclear if or when Middleton's punishment will be carried out. Number 4. Mikhail Popkov. Between 1992 and 2010, a Russian police officer named Mikhail Popkov killed dozens of female victims in the city of Angarsk and elsewhere throughout the Irkutsk region. Authorities began investigating the crimes early on, and they knew based on the similar circumstances of the cases that they most likely had a serial killer on their hands. But Popkov managed to elude detection for 2 decades while using his badge and patrol car to lure unsuspecting women to their deaths. He went out at night in uniform when he was actually off duty and offered rides to his targets. Instead of taking them to their destination, he drove the victims to remote locations where he viciously attacked and killed them using a variety of weapons, including knives, axes, baseball bats, and screwdrivers. The victims were often so mutilated that they were practically unrecognizable, earning the unidentified killer the nicknames of the Werewolf and the Angarsk Maniac. Investigators realized that the murders were most likely being committed by a cop when they began discovering tire tracks at the crime scene from a type of off-road vehicle used by law enforcement. They zeroed in on Popkov in 2012 after testing the DNA of 3,500 current and former police officers in the area. Throughout the course of the investigation, authorities learned that Popkov often targeted women who resembled his abusive mother. During questioning, he said that he wanted to cleanse the streets of prostitutes. He also indicated that he believed his wife was unfaithful and was taking his rage over the suspected infidelity out on his victims. Popkov was convicted of 22 murders, although it's widely believed that he may have been responsible for more, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 3. Joe Gliniewicz. Just a month before his scheduled retirement from the Fox Lake Police Department in Illinois in 2015, a decorated career officer named Joe Gliniewicz was found dead in a wooded marsh near his police vehicle. Just minutes earlier, he had radioed to his colleagues that he was pursuing 3 male suspects at an abandoned cement plant. Gliniewicz had been shot in the chest and his police equipment was scattered throughout the scene. A manhunt for the three suspects ensued, with around 400 officers from various agencies joining in the search. Federal authorities also got involved, but it eventually became evident that Gliniewicz had most likely fabricated the story as a cover-up for taking his own life. Further investigation revealed that he had been embezzling department funds for years and that he thought he was on the verge of getting busted for his crimes. At the time of his death, the Police Explorer program that Gliniewicz had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from was undergoing an audit by village administrator Anne Marin. Before carefully staging his death to look like a murder, Gliniewicz had tried recruiting a gang member to kill Marin. Personnel records revealed a troubling history of alcohol abuse dating as far back as the late 80s, when he passed out in his truck on the side of a highway with his foot on the gas pedal. By then, he was already a cop, and he managed to avoid losing his job but was disciplined. It was the first of numerous suspensions and other trouble he found himself in throughout his career, which included allegations of harassment and threatening a dispatcher with a gun. Still, no one imagined his double life ran as deeply as it did, and people were shocked to learn about the extent of Gliniewicz's questionable and illegal activities. His widow, Melody, was charged with participating in the embezzlement. The case dragged on for 6 years before she finally reached an agreement with prosecutors and pleaded guilty to one felony count of deceptive practices. At the same time, she maintained her innocence, claiming that she didn't know her husband was mixing the ill-gotten funds into the couple's finances. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation. Number 2. Coleman Miller Martin. One day in 2017, the wife of a police officer for the Austin Police Department dialed 911 and reported that her husband, Coleman Miller Martin, was planning to take his own life. She said that he had been depressed recently over family issues before disappearing and telling her that he was leaving for a while to clear his mind. Shortly after that, she received a text message containing a photo of a handwritten letter stating that Martin planned to drown himself in a lake near the Mexican border. Investigators quickly discovered that a state trooper had recently pulled Martin over. He reportedly said that he was on his way to Mexico for a vacation and showed no signs of being in the throes of a mental health crisis. The next day, Martin's vehicle was found, abandoned near a lake with a suicide note inside. Nearby, police found an inflatable raft with his name, date of birth, alleged date of death, and he and his wife's initials written on it. Martin's personal belongings were found in the vehicle, but law enforcement was quick to notice that his passport was missing. Detectives soon discovered that someone was accessing his email account after his supposed death. A close female friend of Martin's soon came forward and provided additional evidence that he staged his own death. After ditching his vehicle, he rode a bicycle several miles to a gas station, threw the bike in the dumpster, and used a payphone to call a taxi to the Mexican border. From there, he traveled into the central part of the country. While disappearing isn't a crime, authorities issued a warrant against Martin for a false reporting charge and arrested him upon his return to the United States. The charge was ultimately dismissed, but Martin's disappointed colleagues were less forgiving. He ultimately resigned from his position at the police department. Number 1. Jeffrey Wharton. In 2020, former Albuquerque cop Jeffrey Wharton showed up at work one day and was met by officers from the nearby town of Rio Ranch, where he lived and had recently gotten into an altercation with his girlfriend. The fight, which was partially captured by Wharton's Ring doorbell camera, left the woman with a brain bleed, lacerations and bruises on her face, as well as marks consistent with strangulation. She was taken to the hospital after getting in touch with her mother and proceeded to report the abuse to the police. Instead of clocking in for his shift to uphold the law like he expected, Wharton was arrested on a handful of serious charges relating to the incident. Footage showed officers removing his belt and cutting his uniform off while taking him into custody. Wharton lost his job and spent 6 months in jail while the matter was sorted out in court. He ultimately pleaded guilty to aggravated battery and was sentenced to 3 years of probation. Thanks for watching. If you ran a business, would you rather hire a disgraced former cop who was suspected of corruption but never formally charged, or a candidate who was recently released from prison but is forthcoming about their past? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.